So good afternoon and welcome to Central European University. I see we have many guests here today. We're delighted to welcome all of you, including distinguished members of the diplomatic corps, as well as guests from Budapest and, of course, faculty and staff. I'm John Shattuck. I'm the president and rector of Central European University, and it's my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome back my friend and colleague, former, I am a former ambassador. I'm confusing my own words here. Colleague Colleen, who is the distinguished United States ambassador to Hungary, who has visited CEU on several occasions and also has spoken from this podium. But we're particularly pleased, Ambassador Bell, to have you here again today, and her husband Brad is with her, I see. Welcome to you as well, Brad. Ambassador Bell, let me just say a few words of introduction about her. She is a great friend of this university and a principled advocate of academic freedom and academic integrity, which of course are at the heart of all universities, and particularly ours. She has helped CEU over the years to maintain our governance autonomy as a private institution operating fully under Hungarian law, and we're honored to be a Hungarian institution as well as a U.S. institution in that respect. Ambassador Bell herself is deeply committed to many of the areas in which CEU is strong academically. Environmental sciences and policy is a particular interest of hers, public service, of course, business management, and international relations. She brings a distinguished career in business and television to her work as the United States ambassador. She's a producer of award-winning programs that have reached more than 40 million people in 100 countries. In addition to her career in international business and the arts, she has a strong record of public service in natural resource protection, child abuse prevention, and public health. She has served on the boards of the Los Angeles Museum of Art, the Children's Institute, and the Natural Resources Defense Council, and the Los Angeles Music Center. She has been appointed to a number of prestigious positions by President Obama. In addition to her appointment as ambassador to Hungary, she was previously chairperson of the President Obama's Advisory Committee on the Arts, a trustee of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., and a delegate to the 2012 Democratic National Convention, in which President Obama was nominated for a second term. Above all, and this is what I want to conclude my introduction with, Ambassador Bell has been an effective and deeply principled diplomat here in Hungary. I especially appreciate the way that she has defined her job as the U.S. ambassador, not only to the Hungarian government, but to the Hungarian people, frequently making reference to that in her speeches and remarks and private comments. Last fall, during the height of the migration crisis, she publicly advocated the humane treatment of refugees and was critical of anti-immigration rhetoric in the media, stating that it doesn't represent the Hungarian people. I think another example of her principled diplomacy is that she has stood up for and made public comments, of course, as U.S. policy and Hungarian policy also indicate, for the integrity of the Ukrainian sovereignty and the Ukrainian people. And she did so, actually quite remarkably, in a setting where it happened to be the same day in which President Putin was visiting Budapest in 2015, about a month after she had arrived as ambassador. Later in the year, last year, she gave a widely reported speech at Corvinus University, our colleagues in Hungary, emphasizing U.S.-Hungarian cooperation in a wide range of topics, economic and security topics, but also noting a decline in Hungarian press freedom and a rise in public corruption. So today we are very honored and delighted to welcome Ambassador Bell again here at CEU for her lecture on, and I quote the title, "The U.S. Perspective on Migration, Security, and Foreign Policy." The lecture will be chaired by my colleague, former Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Balazs, who is currently the director of the CEU Center for European Neighborhood Studies. So please join me all in welcoming Ambassador Bell back to CEU.
Turn on my mic, so excuse us for a minute.
Check and see. We should be live.
All right, testing, here we go. Great. Okay, President Shattuck, Professor Balazs, fellow diplomats, distinguished guests, thank you. Yonapot Kivanok. It's nice to be here today. I am happy to be here as part of CEU's very important lecture series. It's always a pleasure to be in the lively community of CEU. I feel very at home here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all here today. I know very well the role that CEU plays in providing a space for debate and dialogue in Budapest. Hungary and the United States owe you a debt of gratitude for all you do to promote open discussion here at CEU. We share the assumptions that answers are seldom simple, that critical questions are fundamental to democracies, and that challenging each other's views is a sign of political health. I look forward to moving our shared objectives forward today to consider the issues together and to continue our quest for answers. I would like to talk about a few of the challenges of the day. Topics that come from different corners of the world, but that are united, in my view, around an extremely important principle, one that is shared by the United States and by Europe, and that is the rule of law. I will touch on ISIL, on Ukraine, on the migration crisis, and on the global problem of corruption. My focus on rule of law is one that I hope will cast a sharp light on these issues. I would like to draw your attention to something about the rule of law that is often missed. Legal issues often strike us as technical and tedious, because they often are. In truth, the rule of law is an ideal, and that ideal is thrilling. It has built-in excitement and impact and consequence. It is what moved Pope John Paul II to comment, "When freedom does not have a purpose, when it does not wish to know anything about the rule of law engraved in the hearts of men and women, when it does not listen to the voice of conscience, it turns against humanity and society." President Obama said in Munich last month that rule of law was one of the 3 pillars of real democracy in the transatlantic community, just as much as fair elections and free press. The rule of law is part of our shared foundation. It constrains the arbitrary exercise of power, and it holds us to the principles of fairness, of justice, and of human rights. It makes everyone accountable to a system of laws that we ourselves openly and by consensus have passed, and that we enforce equally. As John Adams put it, we have a government of laws and not of men. Rule of law helps to make sense of baffling issues. It answers questions. It frees us, quite frankly, from sloppy thinking. It is the greatest achievement of a democracy, an embedded mechanism to regulate extremes. Rule of law is far more revolutionary than any regime based on the raw national will, the will of the raw majority. It's this ideal, it's this adherence to principle that makes it clear our policy towards ISIL, our policy towards Ukraine, and toward the migration crisis. Our shared commitment to the rule of law points us to just solutions to very diverse foreign policy challenges and threats. It also fortifies our commitment to tackle corruption, because although the rule of law cannot guarantee that there will be no corruption, it can ensure that there will be consequences to those who violate the law, no matter what their status or their connections. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights has lasted as long as the foundations of the European Union, and with good reason. The EU's Lisbon Treaty stresses the same ideals: inviolable and inalienable rights of a human person, freedom, democracy, equality, and again, the rule of law. As European Commissioner Frans Timmermans said, the rule of law is not just an inspiration. It is also an aspiration, a principle that guides both our internal and our external actions. That is, the rule of law is what we are and what we want to be. What we do in response to threats and challenges all over the globe is a reflection of our democratic principles at home. It is in our DNA. First then, it's worth considering a group that operates in an absence of those principles. As President Eisenhower said, the clearest way to show what the rule of law means to us in everyday life is to recall what has happened when there is no rule of law. ISIL, Daesh, is lawless. That is its defining feature. It declares itself a state, but it isn't a state, because in the place of law, at its foundation, is violence, coercion, and terror. In his speech in a mosque in Baltimore this February, President Obama noted that ISIL is a group of organized extremists who draw selectively from Islamic texts and twist them in an attempt to justify their arbitrary, vicious killing and their terror. Groups like ISIL are desperate for legitimacy. They try to portray themselves as religious leaders and holy warriors who speak for Islam. But the president added, we must never give them legitimacy. They're not defending Islam. They're not defending Muslims. The vast majority of the people they kill are innocent Muslim men, women, and children. To defeat ISIL, we have organized the Counter-ISIL Coalition, a group of 66 countries, including Hungary and every member of NATO. We are fortunate to have Hungary contributing in a very significant way to this coalition. In 2014, ISIL began to seize territory in Syria and Iraq, overrunning major cities, committing unspeakable atrocities. Coalition airstrikes, now close to 12,000 of them, have liberated Kobani, Tikrit, Ramadi, and other key cities and towns from ISIL. We have pushed the terrorists out of 40% of the territory that they once controlled in Iraq and 20% in Syria. We have degraded their leadership, we have attacked their revenue sources, and disrupted their supply lines. And currently we are engaged, as you are all aware, in a diplomatic initiative which is aimed at trying to end the war in Syria. That civil war fuels ISIL, and in doing what we are doing now, what all of us, the United States, Hungary, and our partners in the coalition are doing, we are working collectively to isolate, to to weaken and to defeat. ISIL is so far from the rule of law that Secretary Kerry has declared ISIL responsible for genocide, the ultimate war crime. ISIL is responsible for crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing directed at the Yazidis, the Christians, the Shia Turkmen, and also against the Sunni Muslims, Kurds, and other minorities. ISIL kills Christians because they're Christians. Yazidis, because they are Yazidis. Shia, because they are Shia. Its worldwide view is based on eliminating those who do not subscribe to this vicious ideology. These crimes against humanity are the basis of the UN Security Council's resolution last December to condemn ISIL and to hold it accountable for these crimes. The essence of the rule of law is that all citizens, no matter how few they are in number, equally enjoy the protection of law. There are no extra legal persons. Ultimately, the rule of law will prevail, and the facts about ISIL's crimes, crimes of torture, mass murder, rape, and enslavement will be brought to light by an independent investigation and through legal determination by a tribunal. And the United States will strongly support efforts to collect, to document, to preserve, and analyze the evidence of these atrocities. And we will do all we can to make sure that these perpetrators are all held accountable. This process will assure the victims of ISIL's atrocities that the United States recognizes and confirms the despicable nature of crimes that have been committed against these people. The best response to genocide is not more violence, but prosecution, along with the collective reaffirmation of the rights of ISIL's victims. What ISIL wants to annihilate, we will protect and preserve. That requires defeating ISIL, but it also demands the rejection of bigotry and discrimination, those things that facilitated the rise of ISIL in the first place, and the reinstatement of the rule of law. It is not enough to catch a war criminal. We must also do so while upholding his civil rights. It is not enough to stop a terrorist. We must do so while maintaining civil liberties. The rule of law, civil liberties, and civil rights, these are not burdens. These are what make all of us safer and make all of us stronger. As Ambassador Samantha Power said, influence is best measured not only by military hardware and GDP, but also by other people's perceptions that we are using our power legitimately. That belief that we are acting in the interests of the global commons and in accordance with the rule of law is what the military would call a force multiplier. The expertise we in the Counter-ISIL Coalition bring to obliterating ISIL is the same as our expertise in prosecuting it and in restoring the rights of those who suffered so horribly by it. That is how we win. That consistency and legitimacy is the basis of our position toward Ukraine as well. We consider Ukraine's sovereignty to be supreme and Russia's annexation of Crimea to be illegal, period. In the United States, our view of Ukraine is to support a European state, help it meet its democratic aspirations, and to forge a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace. If Ukraine is not whole, if all of its people are not free, and if it is not at peace, then in a sense, Europe is not either. But even more than that, our concern is defending the global rules-based system we are working together to build. We all have a stake in upholding those fundamental rules. Borders and territorial integrity of a democratic state cannot be changed by force. If that rule does not stand, countries around the world may presume that their interests, too, can be advanced at the barrel of a gun. Our response has been to impose sanctions against Russia. We do this legally, by consensus with our European partners. Sanctions, although are not an end unto themselves. But we should not forget why they were imposed in the first place. To stand up for Ukraine's fundamental rights, rights based on international law, which have been accepted since World War II. Russia has a simple choice: fully implement Minsk or continue to face economically damaging sanctions. And the path to sanctions relief is clear. Russia withdraws. Russia can prove by its actions that it will respect Ukraine's sovereignty, just as it expects respect for its own sovereignty. What is at stake is the inherent right of citizens in a democracy to make their country's choices and determine their own future. If we don't stand up for the rule of law, large states will be given a free pass to bully their neighbors into submission. And there is another side to focus on the rule of law with respect to Ukraine. As the new Ukrainian government begins its work with its Central Council, the Rada, under new leadership and a new governing coalition, it's important to remember that Ukraine has already accomplished a great deal. It has achieved a stable currency, a cleaner banking sector, budgetary discipline, enhanced energy independence, and a new police force. What it still needs badly is further reform. 2016 can and should be the year that Ukraine makes reform irreversible. Ukraine needs a new prosecutor general. It needs deep judicial reform. It's time to start locking people up who have robbed the Ukrainian population for so long. And it's time to irradiate the cancer of corruption. While the rule of law cannot guarantee that there will be no corruption, it can ensure that there will be consequences for those who violate the law. President Obama recently hailed the European Union with its 500 million people, its 24 languages, and its 28 countries as one of the greatest political economic achievements of modern times. Every member of the European Union is a democracy. And no EU country has raised arms against each other. These are the ideal Ukraine aspires to and Russia wants to defeat. We want good relations with Russia, but we will not sacrifice the territorial integrity of a democratic nation. We stand by our friends. Our collective security rests on a foundation of our shared values. But as the president also pointed out, even as we take steps that are required to ensure our security, we cannot turn our backs on our fellow human beings who need our help now. Migration and the unprecedented flow of refugees into Europe has presented the most significant challenge to Europe's resources and its solidarity in decades. There are many Hungarians who have responded to the refugee and migration crisis with generosity and compassion by providing migrants and providing refugees with shelter and with safety during their time of urgent need. We believe that the most effective way to discourage dangerous sea voyages and abuses by smugglers is to provide refugees with better access to jobs and education in the countries where they are currently residing, so that they will not feel compelled to take such risks to secure a better life for themselves and for their families. We hope that the additional EU assistance provided under the EU-Turkey Joint Action Plan will complement Turkey's effort and make it easier for Turkey to continue to welcome and host refugees seeking protection, and to look for ways to continue expanding work and educational opportunities for refugees. Here also, the rule of law plays a crucial role. The UN's 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees, drafted in the aftermath of World War II, and the 1967 protocol to that convention require that all those here in Europe who are entitled to asylum and entitled to protection are received under humane conditions and have their cases dealt with fairly, with respect for the individual's due process rights. It also means that all those who have no right to stay must be returned to their countries of origin, rapidly, efficiently, and safely. Solidarity and responsibility go hand in hand. We must be able to trust that the common rules are applied effectively and vigorously, everywhere and at all times. The implications of irregular migration to Europe pose a severe challenge that needs to be addressed in a comprehensive and sustainable manner, reflecting the values that Europe and the United States share, and that includes the Joint Action Plan. Some have said that Europe's values of tolerance are the real root of a migration crisis, that Europe's tolerance is actually at fault because it created a loophole. In this view, migrants are exploiting Europe's values for their own gain, streaming in through that loophole. I disagree. Tolerance is not a technicality that migrants exploit. Instead, migrants and refugees want desperately to benefit from what is at the foundation of our tolerance, and that is the rule of law. Our feelings of tolerance are good, but our laws are better. An appeal to the higher conscience is only a partial preliminary approach to migration. If we're dealing just with our impulses, then we have lost our anchor. We must appeal not only to our higher selves, but to something less subjective, which are namely these legal mechanisms. International laws govern what can be done with refugees, laws essentially invented to safeguard the rights of Central Europeans after 1945. These have to be honored, however we feel. Our public affairs are to be fixed by legal codes. They are not fixed by laws. Our response to the refugee crisis is not just about a moral imperative to show tolerance, and it certainly is not an occasion for us to preach tolerance to others. Instead, it draws on a fact, a basic legal imperative, to uphold the human rights of those seeking asylum. Because this is the law. When we don't protect the legal rights of those legitimately seeking refuge, as President Obama pointed out, you start seeing an us versus them mentality that tries to blame our problems on somebody who doesn't look like us or doesn't pray like us. Our countries are stronger and we are more secure and more successful when we welcome and integrate people of all backgrounds and all faiths, and we make them feel as one. As I have said many times before, we understand that Hungary has an obligation to protect and defend its borders, both to its people and as a member of the Schengen zone. But we must resist the effort to conflate the plight of those fleeing violence and persecution with those who seek to unleash wider terrorist violence, as we saw in Paris and Brussels and Ankara. Our commitment to the rule of law compels us to address both. We must do both. That is why the United States continues to support the efforts of the European Union toward a common and a comprehensive solution. The world's most vulnerable people, those fleeing ISIL, the Syrian civil war, and other conflict areas, must be protected. When we ignore the rule of law and the efforts of the EU to reach a common solution on migration, we fail to acknowledge the facts on the ground. We fail to stand up for our convictions and our principles. We fail to speak to our gifts at meeting a crisis with strength, stability, and compassion. We fail to rise beyond our fear. A few minutes ago, I mentioned the cancer of corruption. Allowing everyone, such as refugees, access to the law has an obvious counterpoint, making sure our own citizens have the same right. As I have said in my public remarks many times, it turns out that corruption, that most outrageous defiance of the rule of law, is more dangerous than any of us thought. Corruption not only hurts economic growth, it alienates and it angers citizens. Business owners can't compete when the rules favor a select few with strong ties to a government. Citizens feel betrayed when their taxes are being used to line the pockets of public servants, elected officials, and their family members, instead of providing the services and security that citizens pay for and that they require from the state. Corruption stalls growth, stifles innovation and investment. It denies people of their dignity and can undermine national security. In some parts of the world, corruption is so pervasive, it creates an environment ripe for civil unrest, resistance to the government, and even violent extremism. We are all harmed by corruption. It is a worldwide problem, and we are able to count the damages. The European Commission estimates that corruption costs the EU economy over $170 billion a year, and more than 1% of the EU's GDP. Corruption adds up to 10% to the cost of doing business worldwide. Corruption in Hungary is a concern, quite clearly a concern of average Hungarians, as public polls here consistently show. Corruption knows no borders. It is a global problem. Wherever systemic corruption has effectively undermined fair governance, the rule of law weakens. To restore public confidence in the rule of law and show that the playing field is level, governments need to make and abide by laws that are clear and transparent and permit citizens to access information that affects them. Governments need to allow citizens to see where their money is spent. Governments also need to hold corrupt officials accountable and to publicize those prosecutions. The names, the crimes, the indictments, the dollar amount seized, and the convictions, and also the penalties. We all need to see that there is a consequence for breaking the law. That's what the FBI does. As we have seen elsewhere in Europe and other regions around the world, when companies and governments are run on corrupt principles, they start to resemble organized crime. Drug cartels, terrorists rely on corruption and bribes to convince police officers to turn the other way at checkpoints, and convince custom officials to permit suspect cargo and even people to cross borders. Corrupt companies force consumers to pay more for goods because the cost of bribes is factored in. Corrupt governments sequester public funds for personal benefit, funds that could go and be used to grow an economy and improve the lives of ordinary citizens. When governments make public procurement decisions through favoritism instead of merit, the best companies often just stay home, depriving the economy and the citizens of the best solutions available to them. So we all lose. As I said, the rule of law does not guarantee there will be no corruption, only that there will be consequences. I'm going to conclude with some comments made by my colleague, John Teft, the US ambassador to Russia, as he told a group of law students in Ukraine recently. The rule of law is fundamental to the success of any modern democratic nation. All people in a society, citizens and non-citizens, must know that they have access to public justice when they believe that they have been harmed. People suspected of crimes must believe that a system of laws is in place that ensures transparent and fair treatment. And businesses must know that if their contracts are not honored, there is a real possibility of redress. None of these elements can be fully achieved without the rule of law. If people perceive that they have unequal access to the courts or see selective prosecutions, they will conclude that the judicial system is unfair and politicized, and this will erode their faith in the institutions whose primary function is to guarantee their rights. Ambassador Teft concludes that an erosion of such guarantees has an adverse impact on the willingness of society as a whole to respect the law and to act in accordance with the established rules. It is our shared work in the transatlantic community to ensure that every case, for every person, we not only have laws to frame our responses to these challenges I have discussed, but that we put these laws in practice equally. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you today. Köszönöm szépen.